Welcome to Pro Audio Profiles. My name is Brendan Decora, and each week I'll be hosting different guests, mainly engineers and producers, but also people from across the industry. Enjoy. On this week's show, we have Dave Schiffman. He's a Grammy-winning engineer, mixer, and producer who has credits with Pup, Vampire Weekend, Olivia, Rodrigo, Audioslave, and the Mars Volta. Enjoy. So, first and foremost, I want to thank you for being here. Really appreciate it.
Sure. You're actually here.
Yeah.
You came over, so
yes.
Thanks for coming.
Awesome. I'd like to start by, if you could go over your backstory, kind of how you got to where you are.
My backstory. Okay. I started at a music studio in Manhattan in the late 80s. Mm-hmm. A place called Skyline Studios. Started there as a runner, getting people's food, cleaning bathrooms, right. Occasionally being allowed to help set up and break down, and gradually worked my way into being an assistant.
Right. What made you want to be an engineer in the first place?
It was looking at album covers and reading credits and occasionally seeing like a picture in the studio. I think just kind of piqued my curiosity.
Right.
Like, how do they do that? Kind of. And it just kind of grew from there.
Okay.
And it was just a pretty esoteric thing.
Mm-hmm.
People thought I was weird because it's what I wanted to do, and there wasn't a lot of schooling for it at that point.
Yeah.
Maybe there were a couple of schools that standalone schools, but also not a lot of colleges that offered a program in it.
Right.
The college I went to sort of had 2 classes, and took them both.
It was just kind of learn on the job situation.
Yeah. And I think back then there was more of a nod towards the apprenticeship vibe that the business used to have.
Right.
Where that's how you did come in. You cut your teeth as an assistant.
Right.
You and then you got your break somewhere, somehow.
I mean, even for me, yes, I went to one of the more, the trade school kind of thing where they have extensive recording information, but they taught you how the gear operates and the basic fundamentals. They didn't teach you how to make stuff sound good.
Right.
Or to be good in a session or any of that kind of stuff. You still had to go and learn, in the studios for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you hit something really important is that they don't teach you how to be a good hang.
Yes.
And 80% of the gig when you're starting out is being a good hang and not being that annoying critter on the couch or next to the engineer who just keeps peppering with, inappropriate questions or, just being stupid.
Right.
There was just a way of being able to embed yourself and become part of the process and become part of the gang.
Right. Exactly.
And that spoke volumes. That was where you got your experience because then there were people who kind of, took you under their wing and looked out for you or, gave you opportunities or, and that was really my schooling was learning, having the opportunity to learn from people like that.
Right. Right. So back to your kind of timeline, where did you go after that first studio?
Well, after that, that was when I met my now wife, and we were dating cross country for a year. She lived out here, and back then it was a lot easier because I could literally go into the Village Voice and buy a ticket to fly to LA, and I would literally fly under somebody else's name.
What?
Like, it didn't matter. There was no security to speak of back then.
Jeez.
You could walk people to the gate back then.
Right,
like
that's
walk
true.
them right up to the plane.
Yeah, that's right.
So multiple times I flew as somebody else, and never got stopped.
Right.
So that's what we would do. We would kind of alternate. Mm-hmm. And then it was kind of becoming evident to me that the vibe in New York was changing.
Yeah.
A lot of studios were closing. They were getting priced out.
Right.
Real estate was really starting to kick up.
Mm-hmm. And when was that roughly?
That was the early 90s.
Okay.
So like
That's
91,
wow.
92, 93
Okay.
was kind of when, the writing was on the wall.
Right.
And it seemed like there was a convolution of things where it was like, okay, it's time to make a move.
Right.
And I came out to LA and I interviewed at a studio called Ocean Way.
Right.
A guy that I assisted a lot for in New York named Kevin Killen got me the interview.
Okay.
I went in and they had just installed their first SSL console out at Record One.
Right.
So I figured that was my angle because the studio I came from was all SSL consoles.
Oh, cool. Nice.
And I was like, I could be like your SSL guy,
Right.
And so managed to talk my way into it. They, they gave me a job, and I think I did a total of 2 sessions on the SSL console.
What?
Like it never worked out,
Jeez.
because there was an assistant who was already there who kind of called dibs on that room.
Oh, okay.
And he
Gotcha.
was kind of all over it. So,
Right.
but it worked out for the better, honestly, because that way I got into all the rooms where people were recording,
Right.
where people were tracking.
Right.
And that's where you were able to kind of become part of the process.
Yeah, exactly.
And that was amazing. Working with amazing producers, engineers, artists, obviously, great music.
Right.
And one of the producers that I was assisting for a bit at that point was Rick Rubin.
Okay.
And it was probably like the second or third gig that I had done with him. It was for a Chili Peppers record called One Hot Minute.
Right.
The record no one talks about.
Yeah.
The one with Dave Navarro.
I personally like that record. I don't know.
It's funny. It just does not get a fair shake,
No,
I don't think.
no.
But so we were in Studio 3 at Ocean Way doing vocals with Anthony. And an engineer by the name of Richard Dodd was engineering. Fantastic, legendary guy out of Nashville. And it was a long process. Anthony was kind of in and out of the studio a bit. So when he wasn't there, American Records, which is Rick's label, would just throw shit at Richard to do.
Okay.
And be like, here, mix this song. Here,
Right.
let's do a remix of this song. Here, we need to do something for this.
Right.
So that's what we became like the clearinghouse,
Nice.
And after a while, Richard just kind of got tired of it. He had been out here for, I don't know, like 2 months or something. He missed his family.
Right.
He was like, I don't really, he's like, I'm ready to go home.
Yeah.
And he looks at me, he's like, you want to take over? And I was like, sure. He said, are you ready? I was like, yeah, I'm ready.
Right.
He's like, okay. He's like, I'll talk to Rick and see
Nice.
what happens. I was like, all right, great.
Nice.
So, like 2 days later, he left, and they hired some other guy to come in.
Oh, jeez.
And I was like, all right, well,
So much for
I
that.
guess, you tried, fine. And so
Jeez.
they bring in this guy from, I think he's from Vancouver,
Okay.
and comes in and he proceeds to just completely destroy the session. I mean, like,
Jeez.
and just such a horrible attitude. Just,
Right.
we had these very intricate multi-track machines over at Ocean Way.
Right.
The Ampex, the ATR 124s, which were very esoteric and very moody, and they had all these little like tricks to kind of keep you, you know, all the assistants knew like these shortcuts, and they had their presets set up. So, you know, first day of the session, we sit down, Anthony goes out into the room, and I grab the remote and turn it around to me, you know, ready to go. And this engineer looks at me, he's like, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm getting ready to record."
Right.
And he's like, "Why is the remote in front of you?" I was like, "Well, because I was going to run tape." And he's just like, "No, you're not." He's like, "If I want you to run tape, I'll ask you to run tape." And he grabs the remote and turns it around. And I was like, "Okay, sure." I was like, "Hey, let me just show you a couple little shortcuts to get around the remote because it can be a little tricky."
Weird,
And he looks at me, he's like, I know what I'm doing." And I'm like, "Okay, no problem." So I went to the back of the room, sat in a chair, and just watched him bury himself, you know, with, you know, two tracks in sync, the rest of the machines in repro, you know, recording over track, just completely. And, you know, he's getting more and more frustrated, and, you know, he starts snapping at Rick, he starts snapping at Anthony, and I'm just like, oh my God, this is just a total shitstorm, you know. And I was like, wow, the day ends, and like this guy didn't even flinch, you know, he just thought everything went fine.
Right.
And I was like, all right, man, well, I guess I'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah.
And so I come in the next day, nobody else shows up. Not him, not Rick, not Anthony, nobody. So, you know, whatever happened that day, you know, hit hard, I guess. So I'm just kind of sitting there in the room. There's a stack of multi-tracks of, you know, stuff that Richard was supposed to do. Right. And I was like, all right, well, you know, they're paying for the room. So I put up a Jayhawk song. Okay. They were remixing a couple songs for, I forget which record it was. It was like the last one George did, George Draculius.
Right.
And I just started to mix a song, you know, and Rick, that was back in the day when Rick would have, you know, 3 rooms locked out at Ocean Way. You know, he was doing, we were in 3, he was working on Danzig in 2. Right. And around the corner, Scott Litt had a room that he would rent out, the clubhouse. He was working on something else in there. So he would just kind of like bounce around. Right. So, you know, later that night, I see him walking down the hall, and I had something. I was like, well, I guess I need to play it for him. Right. You know? So I go out to the hall, and I was like, hey, Rick, hang on a sec. I said, you know, I know you guys needed that Jayhawks song mix, so I took a crack at it. Do you want to come hear it? And he's like, okay, well, make me a cassette and come down to Studio 2 and play it for me. Okay. A cassette. All right. So that's the year we're talking. Yeah, we're talking about 1994, 95. Yeah. So I burn a cassette of the mix, and I go down to Studio 2, pop it in the deck. We sit there, listens to it. Got about halfway through, and he's like, and he waves me to stop it. So I stop it, and he's like, cool, thanks for doing that, man. And I'm like, sure. Okay. I'm like, all right. And I go back to 3. I'm like, oh, what the fuck just happened there? I had no idea what just happened. Jeez. And so, you know, hung out for a little while, went home. Right. And the next morning, the phone rings, and it's Rick's assistant, this woman named Mala. And Mala calls, and she's like, hey, so Rick wants to know if you're available tonight to go to Sound Factory and do vocals with Anthony. Oh, jeez. And I'm like, yeah, sure. Right. What time? She's like, 8:00. I'm like, great. Okay. And so I guess somehow I was in. Right. And that's where it started. And I worked with Rick for, you know, like the next 10 years. Wow. Dang. And, you know, made a lot of great records with him. Yeah. And got, you know, worked with some super talented people, and it was, you know, it was baptism by fire for sure. Yeah. But you know, it was it was the best thing that ever happened to me in terms of my career.
Of course.
Because it was my shot.
Exactly. So nowadays, are you doing more mixing, producing, engineering, kind of everything?
Kind of everything.
Yeah.
I do, most of the stuff, I would say 98% of the stuff I do, I produce, I mix as well.
Right.
It just kind of works out that way.
Right.
And there are a couple of guys that I still am more than happy to engineer for.
Right.
Nice. I still enjoyed that part of it.
Right.
I think, like I have an Atmos setup now as well.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of guys who are just doing Atmos.
Right.
And there's no way I could do that.
Yeah.
I still like the other stuff too much. I still like stereo. I still like producing. I still like tracking. That stuff is still, a lot of fun to me.
Absolutely.
Still, so.
No, even myself, like I've been doing mostly mixing lately, but it's like the more I do, it's like, well, I'll do, a handful of recording sessions here and there, but then I get in the studio, it's like, well, maybe I should do more of this sometimes, it's just to switch it up,
Yeah, just keep it fresh,
Exactly.
and there's something about, like, mixing can get very lonely. I mean, like, I'm back here, there are some weeks where I literally do not leave my house, where I don't put on shoes, where I, shower rarely. And it's just because there's no reason to, and I really look forward to the opportunities where it's like, oh, we're going to go track it Sunset Sound for 5 days, or we're going to go to East West, or, out to somebody else's studio, whatever. Because there's that interaction. There's that, there's that thing that just isn't there anymore.
Of course.
That hang.
Of course.
Which I miss.
Yeah. And that actually brings us to kind of the main thing I'd like to talk about on the podcast is, how to inspire artists in the studio.
Right.
And when you're producing, say, like, how do you usually chat with artists about the vision for the project?
I think it starts from the music.
Right.
And what they're looking to get out of the process. What's their ideal situation?
Right.
And how do we achieve that or get close to that?
Mm-hmm. And actually, how does it vary between, like, an established artist that has a bunch of records versus a brand new artist,
Well, I think with a brand new artist, you're helping them develop their sonic footprint, so to speak.
Right.
Yeah, which I actually really enjoy doing. I think there's something about the energy of helping somebody kind of create something that just they've never been able to do before, or achieve a level that they haven't gotten to before.
Right.
That's always very that feels good to do.
I just want to take a quick break and tell you about my free snare guide. In it, I go over all my techniques, from drum choices, microphone placement, tuning, even mixing techniques. Check it out now at brendandecora.com/huge snare. And now, back to the show. So how does your approach to working with artists changed over the years? How have you evolved?
I think I'm less concerned about being honest and candid because I feel like you don't do an artist any favors by bullshitting them or by candy coating shit.
Right.
If I want to do the record, if I believe in the artist, then I feel like I should be able to say whatever I need to say to them. And not in like a vicious or, aggressive way.
Of course.
But if there's something that I don't feel is good enough yet, or if there's something that, I want to change or looking to change, well, then I bring that up.
Right.
And I make sure my opinion is heard. Now, I will say, and I'll say this to any artist I work with, my idea isn't necessarily the be all end all.
Of course.
I don't, I try not to bring that kind of an ego into the studio. But if I can at least open the question and engage the possibility,
right,
I feel like then I'm doing my job. Because if the chorus on a song, say the chorus wasn't right yet,
right,
and I brought up, hey, a suggestion as to how to change the chorus, but it fell flat. But from that came another idea that did work. Well, then, I think that's my job.
right.
It isn't necessarily to go, I have the answer and this is going to make it a huge hit song.
Right.
It's, here's the question. It's, it's my job to help pose the question about what could be, about how could this be better, or how could this, fulfill what you're trying to do, and go from there.
Go from there, exactly. And how do you tweak your techniques for different styles of music, different genres?
I think, a lot of it depends on, for example, if it's a band, and a band that hopefully plays well together, I think it's pretty important to have everybody playing together,
right,
to record the songs.
Yeah.
And what I'll say to them, and what I firmly believe, is that there's just something about that interaction in the room that is a great foundation to build from. And it doesn't mean that, we have to keep that guitar part, or we have to keep that vocal, or whatever. I mean, everything's open to be edited, redone, adjusted, what have you. But there's still an element of energy there.
Right.
And I'm, I'm not a slave to the click either.
Yeah.
I feel like, the click has its place. I think, songs that maybe are more like loop based, or more have more of an electronic tinge to it. Okay, well, that you're going to kind of want to have on the click.
Right.
Pretty tight. But if you have a band and you have it reasonably on the click, we're not talking about a huge, tempo drop or a dropping beats or anything. But if you have like that ebb and flow of a song, and everybody's playing to that ebb and flow, it doesn't sound like it speeds up or slows down. It sounds natural.
Right.
And I think that's what makes a recording exceptional now.
Yeah.
Because anybody can make a record that sounds perfect. Anybody can line up everything and edit the shit out of it.
Yes.
And there it is. But in the process, do you still have personality? Do you still have emotion? Do you still have groove? I mean, how many times have you had somebody else maybe edit your drums and they come back and it's like, what happened? Like, this wasn't that far off, if you're just looking for a tune-up, but it's just like, it just all gets sucked out, And so, there are, don't get me wrong, there are a lot of great editors out there.
Yeah.
But, every once in a while, you just get somebody and it's just like, I don't know, like I flipped the playlist back to the unedited and that feels a lot better to me, and it's, I think part of the record process is being able to trust your ears also. Yeah. And decide, no, I do like that. Right. That's, exactly. And not being afraid of, well, it's a little out of tune. Okay. Right. Is it annoying? Is it taking you out of the song? I think that's my litmus test. Is it taking me out of the song? Is it creating a moment that I don't necessarily want, or that doesn't make sense for the song? If it doesn't, then if it feels good.
Yeah. And it's tricky too when you're editing, like, for example, you edit the drums a little bit, but everyone was playing to the drums, and so then it's like,
worms.
Yeah. It becomes a spiral.
I can't tell you how many times that's happened where, literally, say, there's that one kick drum that's ahead. Can you pull that back? I'm like, okay. And you pull it back and be like, okay, now that snare after it feels late.
Yep.
Okay, well, I'll just pull that back a little bit.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden the entire section has been chopped.
Yeah.
And you listen against the rest of the track and like, it sounds...
Everything fell apart.
Right. The wheels came off the bus.
Exactly.
It sounds ridiculous.
Exactly.
So then it's like, well, you know what? Let's leave that kick drum alone. Or you just kind of figure out a way to cheat it. It's like, let's pull everybody else back to it or something. Or, a combination of the two.
Right.
It's, you're striving for naturalness at that point. So, there's got to be a give and take.
Yeah. And it's tricky too because, often a lot of clients and artists are fairly technically advanced.
Yes.
They know exactly what they think they want.
Right.
And then they say, okay, let's do this one little thing, but then you listen, it's like, well, that's not really the problem.
Right.
It's this other thing over here, and then
right.
So it's trying to navigate all that as well.
I think part of what comes from experience from doing this for a while is the ability to see 4 and 5 moves ahead.
Yeah.
And sometimes it drives people nuts, but it's become something that, is pretty hard to bite your tongue on sometimes.
Right.
Like, all right, if we do that, what's going to happen now?
Right.
What? Well, now the tempo of the song is different.
Right.
Like, what do you mean? Well, watch,
Exactly.
Watch how this verse is really fast all of a sudden, and the rest of the song is this.
Right.
Oh, yeah. So,
Exactly.
So, I mean, it's kind of like experiencing those pitfalls before is, is good.
Yeah.
Because you've been down that road.
Yeah.
But then comes the second part of it where you have to explain it to the artist or the band that is pitfalling at that point.
Exactly.
And here's why we don't want to do that.
Right.
Here's how I've had it happen.
Right.
Let me explain.
Yeah.
And,
exactly.
And also at the end of the day, you kind of have to pick your battles.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's their record. Their name's a lot bigger on it than mine.
Of course.
So they need to be happy. They need to be comfortable with it. Paramount.
Right.
But as you said, sometimes people don't know how to get to where they want to be.
Right.
And I think part of experience is like, okay, I know where you want to go. Let me help you get there.
Right.
Let me help you avoid a roadblock here and there.
Right.
And get to the finish line.
Exactly. Yeah. It's so often it's like I see these little notes you're telling me, but really it's this bigger picture.
Big picture, right.
So this is really how you get there.
Right. Right. Exactly. And you'll see it in mixed notes too, where it's like, they're essentially asking you to turn everything up.
Yes.
And then so you have to go back and go, what is it that is bothering you about the mix?
Right.
Like, well, it's just not loud enough. And be like, okay, well, aside from turning up the volume, and then you kind of have to figure out a way to get it so they understand, no, it's fine.
Right.
It's good. But I think what you're missing is you want the vocal louder.
Exactly.
Or I think what you're hearing is maybe the vocal's too loud.
Or it's just not bright enough.
Right.
Or whatever. Yeah.
And so what I try and do is I try and look at the notes holistically. Like overall, what is it that they seem to be talking about reverb a lot here. Yeah. Okay, so maybe we've gone the wrong direction in the reverb. Okay.
Right.
And that's the thing. It's like there's mixing is so subjective.
Yes.
So subjective. So when somebody says, well, just do your thing, like, okay, but
I hate when people say that.
Like direction is really important,
Right.
I think.
Yeah.
I really like when a band says, here's what we're going for, or they send me a rough mix where it's like, look, it doesn't have to be, I'm there to mix.
Right.
So it doesn't have to be perfect, but like, give me an idea, like vocal level.
Exactly.
Like, are you looking for like a super reverbed out vibe? Give me a reference. We really.
I actually have a question regarding that, because I'm working with a client now where the rough mixes they send, there's like zero effects on any of the vocals.
Right.
It's super raw, but they want it to be polished and cool. But like, how do you judge? Okay, the balance of this rough mix is super loud, but it's also so raw that it's like a totally different picture at the end of it. So it's like, how do you navigate those kind of things?
I think if I'm feeling unsure about what the band is going for, I encourage them to send me records that they like.
Right. Yeah.
I'll say to them, where do you, say you're on tour, who's opening for you, or who are you opening up for? Who do you feel like you stand in the same room as?
Right.
And
that's interesting.
And that'll kind of give me an inkling.
Yeah.
If I am working with somebody who really isn't good at saying what they want.
Right.
Because I can pick a direction.
Right.
And I feel like, I'm fairly versatile at that. Like, I'm not going to do like the thing.
Right.
Far from it. I wish my mix template was more organized like that, because I never do the thing.
Right.
It just kind of starts from, what's a song sound like? What's driving this song to my ear?
Right.
What's important here? What's not important here? And that's what drives how I set up my mix.
Right.
Exactly. Is it the most organized thing in the world? Definitely not.
Yeah.
But,
So how do you handle creative differences with artists to ensure a positive outcome for both parties? Like if, like two artists are arguing over which part or whatever,
Two artists within the band are arguing about a part?
Yeah.
I think the way I start a record is I try and make it so that communication is as open as possible.
Right.
And people should feel like they're able to make suggestions. But be aware that their suggestions may not always be the ones that get used.
Right.
That being said, I feel like it's worth it to take the time, and if you're between two, to try them both.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times everybody will hear both and it will be really obvious which one works.
Right.
That's
true.
And that way everybody feels heard. You've looked at both ways.
Right.
And, honestly, it's amazing, because sometimes I'll feel like, no, it's that way. And then you hear the other way and you're like, no, you know what?
Right.
That is better.
Yeah.
You're right. I like that better.
Right.
And it's not that it is better. It's I should rephrase that. I like that better.
Yeah.
That works for me.
Right.
That's cool.
There's no right or wrong.
There's no right or wrong.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, the arguments are about minutia.
Yeah.
About the enunciation of a word.
Right.
And not even like an important word, like a the and an
Yeah.
It becomes like a thing.
Right.
And it's like, all right, we're talking about a 15th of a second here in the song.
Right.
Is it really going to affect sales?
Right.
And so at that point, you kind of have to let everybody say their piece. You try it both ways. And, there's definitely been situations where I'm like, I can't tell the difference.
Right.
Or it's just not important enough to me.
Right.
let's have a vote.
Yeah.
You know, who likes it this way? Who likes it that way? That way wins.
Right.
You know, and
let's move on.
Right. And the worst case scenario is when they're like, well, you know, we can just have two different options when we mix. I'm like,
yeah.
You know, yes.
Right.
But
right.
So what generally ends up happening is, you know, you kind of feel which one is working in the room. Mm-hmm. And I just use that one.
Yeah.
And if somebody brings it up, I'll be like, oh, right. Yeah, we were going to try that.
Exactly.
And I'll do it.
There you go.
You know, but it's like, I just want to try and make the decision.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And, you know, it varies from project to project, artist to artist. There are some artists that need you to go, that's great. That's what we're using.
Right.
And there are other artists who want to challenge you along the way. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you got to let that challenge happen.
Right.
Because it's part of the process.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's an establishment of trust. Mm-hmm. You know, you go through it a couple of times and they can see you're not taking sides. You're in it for the, you know, your opinion is for the right reason.
Right.
Then there becomes less and less challenges, I think, because they're like, okay, you know, he's got it.
Yeah, exactly.
I think he understands what we're going for.
Right.
And it's obviously never my intention to make anybody in the band look bad.
Of course.
You know, like that doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
It doesn't work for them. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I'm not going to do something that is detrimental to the song, or at least in my opinion.
Right, of course.
You know, and, you know, it gets back to, it's all, you know, at the end of the day, it is subjective.
Right, absolutely. So, is there any current or recent projects that you can talk about that you want to? Anything that's been released recently?
Well, there's a record I made last November, December with this band called No Bro.
Okay.
They are I guess punk, sure, like punk rock band that just happens to all be women.
Okay.
And they're great. They really, you know, great vibe, great energy. Songs are all just really good.
Nice.
And it's finally just, you know, the first single came out, I guess, like 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Okay, cool.
And yeah, like
nice.
I have high hopes for it.
Awesome.
And I'm actually doing the Atmos mixes right now.
Oh, cool. Nice. Sweet. I like to wrap up each podcast with the same kind of set of questions. Mm-hmm. The first one is, who has been your most influential teacher?
You know, not by actually showing me stuff and explaining stuff, but I'm going to have to say Rick.
Yeah.
You know, just because of the situations he put me in that forced me to become a better engineer.
Right.
And because I was a fly on the wall during all of these records where I was able to see how he interacted with the artist, what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it. And I felt like that was just this incredible crash course in what to do and what not to do.
Yeah.
You know, and, you know, look, he's ultra successful and deservedly so.
Right.
But, you know, everyone's got a different way of doing things. And you see what rubs somebody the wrong way. You see what doesn't rub somebody the wrong way.
Right.
And what's crazy is one thing will really rub somebody the wrong way, but somebody else will really like it.
Right.
So there is no like consistent, you know, it's so much of it is psychology and just knowing who you're figuring out who you're dealing with.
Exactly.
And, you know, to his credit, he was usually pretty good at that.
Right.
And he was able to get people to do things they necessarily didn't want to do, but do them well.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the job.
Nice. Exactly. Nice. Next question is, what is your favorite reference track if you have to go to a new studio, kind of learn the room? What are some of the tracks you put on?
Well, one is Rich Costi mixed this Weezer record that I recorded, and there's a song on it called Troublemaker, which has this 808 that comes in like it's a single hit, like before the chorus.
Right.
That's always been like my bottom end check because it just sounds so great on the right set of speakers.
Right.
It just hits you like a brick wall. It's awesome.
Nice.
That's a great sounding record.
Awesome.
My Brightest Diamond. Have you heard of her? She really, really talented. My friend Andrew Sheps mixed a record for her. It's probably like 2 records ago.
Right.
And there's a couple songs in there that he just slayed. That the whole record sounds phenomenal, but obviously there's some songs that will hit you in a certain way, but there's a couple on there that are just great where I can put them up and know what somebody's stereo is made of or what my monitors are made of.
Exactly. Nice. Last question.
Yeah.
What would be one tidbit for an upcoming engineer?
It's great to ask questions. It's great to be involved, but know your place.
Right.
Be able to be out of the way, but have the engineer's back at the same time.
Yeah.
Look for the opportunity to ask the question.
Right.
Not in the middle of doing overdubs or in the middle of something that's important. Look for the moment.
Yeah.
And most guys are more than happy to answer your questions. It's just a matter of timing.
Right. Nice. Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Sweet. Thanks so much for checking out the show. Make sure to subscribe for all the updates, and I'll see you next week.